So please have a seat. If folks are still outside, I would request them to come inside and have a seat.
Okay. There's some seats here too. Right?
Yeah, there are seats in the front, 3 seats in the front. Yeah, come on.
Seats here.
All right. Thank you everybody for coming on a Friday late afternoon. Appreciate it. And we also should appreciate the rain gods these days. I've learned, having lived in California 22 years, I stopped appreciating that, but now I do. For giving us fantastic weather today. So we'll do a quick round of introductions, but first of all, my name is Sanjit. I am Sanjit Dang. I am the co-founder and chairman of UFirst Capital. The CEO, Ekta, you want to introduce yourself? Maybe
Hi
stand up.
everybody, I'm Ekta. I'm the CEO of UFirst Capital. Very excited to be here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And I want to give a big shout out to the entire DevRev team for working very closely. Kavya, who is actually based in India, she worked late hours on Zoom calls for planning and stuff. Bhavana is there. Bhavana, please introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Bhavna from the DevRev team.
Yeah, Sangeeta, who helped a lot with the ops and planning as well.
Yeah, hi, Sangeeta Rilan. I work here at DevRev as People Ops.
Yeah, and Emily and Patrice from her team helped out a lot. So thank you to the DevRev team.
Thank you. And we have
yeah.
some DevRevlers hanging out.
Yeah, come on in, guys.
We'll probably have to leave in another half an hour, so they're like, I don't want to step in.
Yeah, don't feel shy. All right, so today's panel will be an informal discussion around, since in the audience we have quite a few startups, so we'll try to tailor the questions and the answers hopefully as well towards the startups. And when we started planning for this panel, this SVB crisis had not happened, and some things have changed. So startups are going through unprecedented times, so we'll talk about that. But I think before we get into any questions, it would be great to do maybe a quick introduction, right? Maybe Vibhor, will start with you.
Sure. Yeah, hi everybody. Great to be here, and big fan of Dheeraj. So would never lose an opportunity to hear Dheeraj's thoughts. So I'm as much an attendee as I'm a panelist. But I lead global AI and SaaS investments for Citigroup. We are the venture arm of Citibank, present in about 100 countries. We invest anywhere from 300 to 500 million per year. Have over 150 companies we've invested in. Prior to this, I was a founding general partner at a private equity fund, and before that, I was at Intel Capital for 9 years.
Thank you, Vibhor. And now the pressure is on.
Yeah, we're all listening to you now.
No, please. But thank you everyone for being here, and thank you Sanjit and Ekta for doing this. I mean, I will start out by saying that I wish I had a last name like Dang. So the fact that I don't, I'll have to do better today. But I'm the co-founder and CEO of DevRev, and before this, I was the co-founder and CEO of Nutanix for about 11 and a half, 12 years. Before that, I was basically doing engineering of data, so a lot of data warehouses, databases, clustered systems, distributed systems. And the last 2 years has been a great journey in learning, building DevRev, a lot of lessons from Nutanix, having taken it from 0 to 6,500 people, and spending like $1 billion in sales and marketing, overall spending like $1 billion, 4 billion, 5 on the whole company to go generate $1.6 billion. There's a lot of good lessons to be had with that. Obviously we were in a decade of low interest rates, so now how do you build a company going forward will be an amazing lesson as well. So looking forward.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dheeraj.
Amit Zavery, thank you again for hosting and inviting me. I work at Google, the cloud. Been there for 4 years. I run the platform, product and engineering, as well as some of the solutioning team as well there. Previously, I was at Oracle for 24 years, worked in mostly middleware technologies, so building out stack to allow people to build applications on it. And similarly in Google, my charter is to really allow developers to build on our platform and make it easy for any kind of developer, professional, citizen. We're seeing a lot of AI kind of developers, Web3, be a different kind of things, and how to make it easy for them to access the innovation we're building into our platform as well. So that's what I've been doing. I've been fortunate enough to meet Dheeraj many years ago, so I've been following that, and it's great to see all the progress you guys are making. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amit. Joe.
My name's Joe Jasin. I'm a partner at a VC firm called DNA Partners, and we're called DNA Partners because we're investing in the entrepreneurial spirit of the staff's DNA. And our vertical that we invest in is infrastructure software for digital media transport, so value chain of digital media end to end. And our typical investment is 50 to 500K, that's our realm. And then our geographies are USA, China, and now we're taking on the Philippines. So we're about 8 years old, and we're excited about new opportunities in digital media. And excited to be here because of Sanjit. And I think you think of me as the wireless guy. So most of my career has been 1G through 6G. And we can talk about 6G if we want after the conference, or maybe I'll touch point a little bit on it, on AI and how it integrates into 6G. But just, I think the undercurrent of being here and thinking about AI, for me, is more of an operations, mobile wireless, regulatory perspective, and not the software stack of back end and front end. Although I can speak to that, but I think today maybe hit me with questions with regulations and operations and geographies.
Sure, absolutely, wonderful. And to your last point about AI has obviously, now with GPT out, everybody's talking about it finally, and AI has been entering enterprise. Maybe Dheeraj will start with your thoughts through the Nutanix journey and then into DevRev also. How have you utilized AI? And then we'll go to Vibhor, Amit, and Joe.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, to me, first of all, I'll start off by saying that it's like what cloud was in 2013, 2012, 2013. It's like what open source was in 2002, 2003 timeframe, Linux and MySQL and commodity servers and things like that. So it's the new revolution. And now the question is, it's a level playing field. Everybody had access to cloud 10 years ago, and everybody had access to open source and commodity hardware 20 years ago. Who really productized it, who designed around it, who commercialized it, who monetized it? And not everybody did. The players who basically did a good job, like even if you look at Yahoo coming and saying that we know how to monetize ads the first. They had the Overture project, and if anything, they were the first to really think about auctioning ads and things like that. But here comes Google and uses commodity hardware and commodity open source to the hilt and says, look, we'll go do this bottom up. They were one of the early PLG companies in the world of ads, and they crushed Yahoo over the next 5 years, using commodity everything to the fullest. And you can say that about Snowflake. Like 10 years ago there was S3, there was EC2, but not many people actually knew that you could build a data warehouse and build a business like this. They probably took a leaf out of Bigtable, BigQuery, and all that as well. Which is really so I think there will be that level of scrutiny now in the world of AI. I feel like we need to really design it. So design and AI will actually be the yin yang of each other, because you need to still learn from humans the notion of reinforcement and what's right and what's wrong, and how do you really do this on an every click basis, where your recommendations actually are respected, and at the same time you are humble enough, your bots are humble enough to ask the human for hints and answers and things like that. So anybody who tries to build a very arrogant app or arrogant bot would probably fail.
Yeah.
Because people are very skeptical, especially as it goes after knowledge workers and their sort of hours and productivity and so on. I feel like the ball will be in the court of design. Like, how do you really design these things really well? And then finally, how do you make it economical? Because training a model from scratch is worth $10 million. We know that GPT takes about $10 million, but startups don't have that kind of money. So the idea that you could not just fine tune, but you can do prompt engineering, and using the best libraries for, say, prompt engineering will be the taste that startups can bring to the table. So I feel like it's a really interesting time for AI, but at the same time, the more things change, the more they remain the same. people will be people, and you need to still give them something so well designed and so economical that every startup can use it before you get to trying to make $10 million from a large company. So.
Right, makes sense. Yeah, Vibhor, your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, several really compelling applications, right? So if you look at AI for customer service, people have been experimenting with chatbots for a very long time, but the abandonment rate is extremely high, right? It follows this exponential curve where if you're only 90% accurate, you get 10% adoption, right? 95% accuracy, all of a sudden adoption rate goes through the roof, and at 99% accuracy, pretty much everybody uses it. So, large language models now being implemented for customer service, right? Both for external facing use cases as well as for employee facing use cases. And a number of companies, Moveworks, Espressive have, Icera have been launching these products now for both the employee side and the customer side. Same thing on marketing, just amazing use cases there. Jasper AI has gone from 0 to 100,000 customers in 2 years. Pretty much every digital marketing person is now using it to generate marketing copy. So lots of applications there. Similarly on the sales side, very interesting application in contract review and contract generation as well, right? So again, using large language models to understand contracts, review contracts, generate contracts. So lots of interesting applications there. So yeah, I think large language models very fundamental to business software going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Amit?
No, I think completely agree with some of the things I think you guys are saying. I think that what we're seeing, separating out the consumer and the enterprise part, I think what you see in what consumers want versus what B2B or enterprises want are very different. And I think what we're seeing with many of the customers we speak to nowadays, or even startups, there's not one model which fits everybody's need. So there are going to be variations on it, as well as the size around it, right? Because the cost of training, as you mentioned, is very high. How do you get it pre-trained? How do you provide models which are going to be very specific to a domain? And how do you allow companies to pick the specific things according to your needs and be able to switch things around as well? So how do you make it flexible enough and very domain specific is becoming a big requirement, right? So, and the second thing we're seeing with a lot of enterprises, like how do you make sure data doesn't get used to train something which gets exposed to your competitors? So there's always business models evolving when we talk to our customers, like they might want to share the data with you as long as you help them. They might want something out of it. All the structures we have to create to make sure that you're training the models properly and providing a lot of value to the companies who are providing the data, and then not kind of disintermediating them in some way or form or shape, right? So I think as you start structuring and using some of these things, you have to start thinking a lot more than just saying I have things available out there and just adopting it. And when we talk to financial services, we talk to public sector or telcos and all that stuff, they're very worried about how this impacts their information. And data for them is very, very critical. So anybody who's adopting these things have to really make sure they safeguard this, provide a lot more insights into it, and provide guarantee. I mean, a lot of countries also, of course, the things we do with cloud today with sovereignty. It's the same issue now we're running into with the B2B kind of things for LLM as well. And there are a lot of research going on, as you know, depending on what kind of modality you are. So how do you make sure that those things are properly managed and available to all the different use cases as well? So the use cases are emerging, tons of them. I think if you make the list, it's like thousands of them. But each one will have very specific needs, and you want to make sure you have that spectrum of capabilities. And everything doesn't have to be the most expensive, doesn't have to be the high volume one. There might be some things you can solve very simply and easily as well. So really take a look at those kind of options, and then make sure you don't get into like something which is going to prevent you from expanding users or customers, because you kind of pigeonhole yourself to some architecture which might make it very difficult long term. So I think that's the things we're kind of starting to see in the B2B side, and really be thoughtful about the AI. The AI has been around for many, many years. It's nothing new. And it's been used in many products. Now, I think the two parts which are changing now is one is pervasive in each of the products, but second, how do you use it in your own kind of world, and how do you connect the dots around that? So that's the work I think to be done.
It intrigued me when you kind of separated the consumer side and the enterprise side. I thought we are kind of entering the era of consumerization of IT, consumerization of business user, where the business user expects an Uber or Google-like experience as well.
I think the user
So the
experience.
developers have to think
Yeah.
like that too, business developers.
Yeah, I think experience might be similar, but I think the guardrails are very different,
Mm.
and the
That's
structures
true.
are very different.
One thing I'll add, sorry,
It's okay.
go ahead, just compliment what Amit said around data engineering is still because large language model is still about natural language, probably English to begin with. But there's a lot of structured data that also needs to be remembered because we've not forgotten about structured data. And obviously what LLMs can do is generating SQL so that managers don't have to learn SQL. What you have to be the mercy of data analysts in the past, which hopefully now LLMs can be used as a layer above so that everybody can be a data analyst as well. It's a really important piece of the puzzle. One more thing around decentralization, I was just thinking while Amit was talking that there was TensorFlow, and sorry Amit, I'm going to do this example, and then there's PyTorch.
Yeah.
And there was a decentralization that actually happened with PyTorch, where people are able to run a lot of these things on their laptops too. And I feel like there'll be this decentralized thinking that will emerge as well, where like things like Project Alpaca and so on, like, okay, can I really do this 7 billion parameters for $600 or maybe on my laptop for 10 hours or some such thing, which I think will actually give this centralized versus decentralized model a real sort of interesting next 3 years.
Yeah, very interesting. Joe, and maybe you can also comment on the regulatory aspects of AI,
Yeah.
right?
Governance and compliance
Correct.
is significant, I think, for the culture of the future. I was just talking to one of DevRev's employees about the culture of AI. But I want to back up a little bit and provide some context here, very big context, macro context, and we probably have in the audience, hopefully investors, operations owners, developers. I hope that everyone's in there, but again, this is no new conversation. AI, I moved here in '96, and AI has been a part of the dialogue for me in Silicon Valley since '96. But if we back up, I read to 1940, Alan Turing, Turing, is considered the founding father of AI, and he built the cipher machine in the 1940s. So let's not get delusional here in our Silicon Valley bubble and be like, oh, AI is great. I mean, I've been on AI panels for, I would say, probably 14 years. So I moved here in '96, and I've done 2 startup companies, enterprise software companies for the mobile industry. And so in '96, I was starting to be a part of it. It was called business intelligence back then, a little bit different variant. And 2004, I was dealing a lot with Korea. Korea already had, for their portals, IM bots that were doing predictive for customer care, for their services, for more digital services. So, let's fast forward to 2015, SAP is getting really involved with it, Oracle, they're all doing AI. If we go from 2015 to 2020, 22, 23, okay, now we've got, the press all around it with the latest OpenAIs and, all the technology associated with it. So yeah, it can be a catapult position now. Are we going to put the throttle down and we're going to commit to AI? But really, AI has been either an entity as I consider like a meal or a spice. Is a company building it as we're going to build a whole meal? We're going to build a company all around AI and build those damn algorithms. And then humans make algorithms and computers make algorithms. So it's algorithm city, right? So we're going to put the accelerator down now and really start to implement it in different ways, or are we going to put, spices around each company and then call ourselves, a software and AI company? So, either commit, audience, if you're like, I am an AI company platform, or here is our platform and it has AI inside of it or AI with it, like a meal or a spice. So I think what we need to consider, we in the room as creators, we need to think of the culture of AI. So the big browser companies are already starting to force feed us like it's 1999 and saying, oh, upgrade your browser now. Click on this, which is basically, is it a widget? Is it downloading client software? What's it doing? Why should I click on it? Is it a banner ad from 1999? I don't know. Is it another variant of DoubleClick, that Google bought in '98, I think it was. So let's consider the culture of the world and not be assumptive and this is better than what you think or you should be clicking here now. again, just the culture of AI. Let's try to be civil and polite and not be assumptive.
I think the only thing that I would add to what Joe said was timing wise. I mean, look, going back to your point on AI has been talked about for 30 years, but there's something about timing which we are finally getting right. It's like there was TCP/IP in the 70s, and then came the browser. So all of a sudden, HTTP and the browser and Netscape made it accessible. It became very accessible. I mean, there was a Motorola phone and even a satellite phone back in the early 90s, and here comes Apple. So the timing around 3G and China manufacturing and Samsung and Korea manufacturing, there's a lot that actually happened in 2007 timeframe. I mean, HTML5, many of these things that actually happened around 2007 that made the iPhone rather than the satellite phone of 1992. And I think we are at this time now where we could look back and say TCP/IP was there, networking was there, but there was no real internet until the browser became
the killer app.
The killer app. I mean, the way that every
Accessible.
person, it became just accessible, you know.
Yeah.
And I think with this open AI APIs, the Bard APIs, the Alpaca running on a laptop, we are now at a point, chatbots coming and really making it such that they're accessible. I feel this timing is different. The GPUs getting cheaper and cheaper. There's a lot that's happened in the last 10 years. Similar to the 30 years of taxes we paid in networking, or the 20 years of taxes we paid with satellite phones and cell phones of the yore. I think we've paid the taxes, and now it's time to really reap the benefits.
AI technology sophistication meets consumer accessibility.
Absolutely.
That timing. Go ahead. Amit.
100%, I do agree. I think a lot of these technologies now, the evolution has become much faster. Like the LLMs have been, people have been training, but now it's all real, which was not possible. And now be able to kind of go and train your model across so much data volume in a very quick amount of time and make it available to you in your particular domain. That has changed. And I think it's funny you mentioned it. I was in India last week, and taxi drivers asking about ChatGPT. So people are getting, I mean, this is kind of very interesting in terms of how the information access and the visibility of some of these things and the capabilities are getting so fastly evolving is really making it possible now. And you can apply this to so many domains now, which you couldn't do before. You have to be a data scientist, you have to be an AI scientist to do a lot of this work. Now you're getting a lot of packaged offerings, which were not possible before. And I think every company is starting to do that.
I will say about science to engineering, that's the big challenge for every startup out there. And we talk about this at DevRev every day, that look, we cannot have AI only people. Like going back to your point as well, you cannot have AI specialists. AI has to be oxygen. That's there for everybody. It's like fresh air. So everybody has to become AI literate and read on these things, because it's like, you know, the way Microsoft did research and the way Google does research. You know, Microsoft did research as a distinctive department that the engineering guys are like, what are you talking about? None of this is usable. And in those 20 years, Google just said engineering is research. So research and engineering were actually intertwined together. So pretty much all the work they did, whether it was starting with GFS to BigQuery to Bigtable, everything was actually started out like that, you know, including the LLM work that they're doing, you know. And I feel like it's time for every startup to think about how every engineer needs to be an AI engineer. And just like every engineer had to respect design in the last 10, 15 years, they have to respect and be very AI literate.
It's to the analogy that the Linux Foundation leader, Jim Zemlin, said in 2007, every company is a software company.
Yeah.
Every company has to be a software company now. They have to have some component of it. So breathing the oxygen of software with AI, yeah. But sometimes I want to go to an oxygen bar. I don't want it force-fed down my browser, so to speak.
Yeah,
you know?
It's an important point. You know, he brings out something that I have spoken about in the past about, so AI is oxygen. So how do you make money on it? Like, you can't make money on something that's
Everywhere. Yeah.
But there are people, good product managers, like, hey, I can make that into liquid oxygen cylinders, and I can sell it to hospitals, and I can put it by scuba diving beaches, and I can put it in Vegas. But it's going to be one of those where product management becomes a very important piece of this puzzle as well, because, you know, if AI is going to be watched in every company out there, how do you really go make it such that people are like, wow, this AI really works?
Makes sense. You know, so it's very exciting time for startups. given the technology changes happening, but it is also a little nervous time for startups at the same time. So maybe we'll switch gears to that aspect, and would love to. We'll start with you, Vibhor. How are you guiding startups in this time on efficient growth, the growth rate versus focus on conserving cash?
Yeah. Yeah, all my startups have plenty of cash runway. They've never overextended themselves in the last 2 years, and yeah, everything is good. No, it is crazy. So several of our startups did raise very large rounds. $300-400 million. In fact, they're generating now 10-12 million of interest from the cash they raised, which is absolutely
you're on the good side of the equation.
which is absolutely insane. But but having said that, I mean, the funding environment is as bad as it can get, right? So I started my venture career in 2009, and 2009 was bad, and I think we're starting to approach similar time frames here as well. So I think ultimately it's just back to basics, right? For startups. So what is your unit economics? What's your magic number? What is your gross retention? What is your net retention? And for all the startups here, there's several venture firms, Benchmark, Battery, Iconic, that all publish what is considered top quartile.
Mm-hmm.
So having 130% net retention, which is, if you have a customer base, every year you're generating 30% more revenue from that customer base. Your gross retention being in the mid 90s, which means that you're never losing more than 5% of your revenue every year from customers that go to other startups. Your magic number should be greater than 1, which is how much money are you putting in sales and marketing versus new ARR that you're generating. And the lifetime value that you have compared to your customer acquisition cost, which is related to your gross and net retention. Like, all those metrics are very, very important as VCs are deciding which startups they're going to fund or not fund. And and there is a figure out there that there is 300 billion of dry powder, from all the funds that were raised in 2021 and 2022. But it's very, there's a lot of fallacy in the dry powder, because ultimately a lot of the VCs who have startups that have a lot of high burn need to support these startups, and there's a lot of insider rounds that are happening. So the new investment dollars are declining every quarter, right? So we have had sequential quarterly declines for the last 4 quarters in new funding. So yes, every startup just has to be super operational efficient, like I'm sure DevRev is. So.
Yeah.
No, I mean, yesterday I was reading a tweet about, I don't know if you folks saw it, Sylvester Stallone's history, like his 1970s, mid-70s, he came with a script on Rocky, and nobody was really buying the story, the script, and like pretty much everybody actually passed on it, except for one production house. But they said on one condition, that we buy the script from you, but you will not be the actor, because we don't feel you can really carry the character of Rocky yourself. And he's like, he just kept resisting, and the point there was that he was so poor that he couldn't get any poorer. Like, well, I've really become friends with poverty to a point where, I think there was a very interesting term they had used around, I'm commercially engaged with poverty in a way that nobody can really make it any worse. But there was a really good thing that it then talked about, like, how do you really stay fiscally responsible so that you can be creatively reckless? And I'm like, oh, this is a paradox now. You have to be fiscally responsible, extremely disciplined fiscally, so that you can be creatively reckless. And that's what we're trying to do at DevRev, which means a lot of things. We are also in the business of arbitrage, and that means that we have to go to any part of the world where talent is. And in many ways, I think because of cloud and because of access to APIs for the biggest and baddest models out there in the world, I think a lot of people around the world can actually be really good programmers now. And if anything, we are also shifting left to colleges and young people, and that means that you have to postpone some instant gratification, like, oh, I just got people with 10 years of experience to do things. Instead, how can college do more for you? If anything, how can interns do more for you? We have a really disciplined way of thinking about marketplace and APIs, which means that interns can actually be thinking like community people. They're not part of our payroll, they're not on our GitHub. So really left shifting software development to the point where it's not just colleges but interns, and not just interns but people who are never on our payrolls. How do they build code for us as well? I think those are the clever ways in which we're going to do things. This year we're going to do a ton of hackathons where people who are not on our payrolls, but we'll give them a bounty. You know, the best plugins, and we call them snap-ins. How do you really have the rest of the world crowdsource things for us? I think that's basically and it probably will lend itself for the future forever, because any company that's really thought about the network effects of community talent has done well.
And thank you for having us as investors in DevRev, as part of DevRev family. One of the things I really liked, last year learning about DevRev is how you can help startups actually accelerate product market fit, which I was thinking is even more important in these tough times.
Agreed.
Maybe if you can talk about how DevRev as a platform goes beyond just a startup by itself into a platform.
No, I think that's a really important point. And look, it's part of our overall learning as well, that initially we have generalists in companies, and even developers care about a business. But then quickly enough, we get specialists and departments, and all of a sudden we have barriers, and we want to give the notion of deep flow and focus to developers. So very quickly you start to see this phasing out of customer centricity. The curiosity starts to go away. So one of the big things about DevRev is, how do you really make the back office, even at 10 people, 15 people, 20 people teams, how do you make them customer centric? And how do you make the front office product centric? Because you start to really create this dichotomy of, okay, you folks are customer centric and you folks are product centric. If you're lucky, you'll actually get developers to be product curious, but they really believe in microservices and a ton of code, and why churn out code? I'm doing commits every day. But what gets lost is, are you really contributing to the product? Is the product being used at all? So there's a bunch of things that we feel is missing because we have too many tools between the end user and the customer support team, and product managers and developers. So what does it mean to build these real-time pathways and extremely economical, where you don't have to worry about, I don't have a license, so how do I even know what support tickets look like and what customer conversations look like? I feel like we'll need to, with AI and analytics and the public cloud, you can really democratize access to customer conversations and customer tickets and product enhancements. And there's so much work that really product managers dread to do because it's too much of English reading. Like, man, I'm gonna have to triage 1,000 tickets now, and who knows, maybe 60% of them are very similar. Machines can do a lot of that stuff now. So our goal is to really build these bridges where end users can really get close in real time with customer support, which might not be people at all. It could be bots that are doing an amazing job, like human-like jobs in terms of responding to things and so on. But how customer support gets close to product management, and finally how product management gets close to developers.
Yeah, I think on the developer side, especially startups, one thing I think the principles are kind of still the same, to making sure that our advice to many of them is like, make sure you build on open standard technology. And it's kind of easier said than done. I mean, a lot of developers, of course, a lot of startups start on AWS. And strangely enough, it's probably very proprietary and technology you are locked in. But then it becomes very difficult to kind of move to anything else you want to choose or anything else you want to use. And similar things are happening in AI, right? You start with a proprietary stack of LLMs or different APIs, and doesn't give you the ability to kind of move around very easily. So kind of thinking through that, when you are on this journey, looking at the broader spectrum of options out there, and how do you really make sure that you have ability to have flexibility, as well as be able to kind of opportunity to kind of make changes much more easily or not. Right, so that's at least on what we're doing in Google, at least on cloud side, is to really provide you that openness through marketplace or through our own models, as well as having a marketplace of other models available. So it doesn't have to be only Google technology, and you don't have to be building on completely end-to-end on GCP to really take advantage of a lot of these technologies. So I think making sure that you think through some of these things and not just jump to the first thing you see, and then be locked in. I mean, there are a lot of startups who are having difficult times when they have to rewrite their stack on standard set of capabilities, and that costs a lot of money, and then you are kind of stuck negotiating, trying to find the better alternatives in many cases. So that would be something worth thinking through, at least I think.
That's very helpful for startups. I think even especially in these times.
Yeah, I think that's a great notion to hit on. It's the philosophy across the world is be more open and build on general standards, omitting Apple, you know? So, you know, when you're thinking about who you want to do business with, who do you want to do business with, Google or Apple or Microsoft or XYZ company that's building open standards? And you think about AI, there seems to be centralized and decentralized initiatives out there that you can commit to. So, and then I don't know about if you want to talk about regulatory aspects, but
Yes.
you know, you think about geographies in order to regulations. So I have experience in China, Korea, Singapore, US, and you know, we think about China. Is it AI? Is it doing AI differently, better or worse than the US? Is the US doing it better or worse or more or less? Before this conference, I was able to think about it a little more detail oriented, and I'm trying to throw it out as a macro. But when we think about AI, it's always qualitative and quantitative. You know, it's a macro formula that we always think about. And I was thinking long term versus short term. If we have China is really good at the quantitative because they can get all the access from their citizens from multiple data points, right? So they knew that going on, that it can be top down, monitor the citizens, get all the data from all the different touch points, whether it's payments or where they're walking down the sidewalk or wherever it is.
Yeah.
So that's getting a lot of quantitative data, but they're not getting it's turning into qualitative data, but they're not doing the innovation feeds that we do in the United States. Innovation feeds meaning invent and put a discipline behind it and make it into a product, right? So that's what we do in the US, and other countries do it as well, but we're just talking about USA and China here. So when we have our short term where we're not taking everyone's data from each citizen, but we're inventing a lot more, and we've always been better at software than the rest of the world, and that still holds. I mean, I know India has its initiatives, and other countries are good at software as well, but it's still the derivative of software. Innovation and invention is coming out of the US still today. We could lose it, right? We could lose it at any time. So when I think about long-term qualitative and quantitative for both of our countries, yeah, we're not in the short term, we're in the long term because we have the innovation and time on our side, right? They just have the quantitative, and then they're always compounding it in short times, but they're not doing the invention part of it.
But I think one thing that I look back at in the 1930s, we were good at crowdsourcing atomic bomb talent in the 30s, right? We were not. Immigration was the thing that kept it going, and we were still. That's why we became the first atomic bomb. I think we've been good at crowdsourcing as a country with immigration, and that'll be our key competitive advantage. You know, how do we crowdsource better than anybody else? Which is true for all startups here too. Like, how do you crowdsource? One more thing I'll add to, we heard the word customer support a few times. Even this net dollar-based expansion of 130, I feel like in this day and age, customer support becomes even more important. Because when people say, I have a net dollar-based expansion of 130, that's the effect. The cause is something else. The cause is, you know, you are really being respected by your current customers, and it's not just the product or the tool or the service, it's what happens when shit hits the fan, you know, and that's when customer support becomes so important. I mean, look, honestly, right now, why AWS is competitive in this market against the GCP or Azure, and I hear this consistently from developers, is because AWS puts its developers in front of the startups developers. They're like, man, if I have access like that to AWS's people, then I'm going to choose this versus that. So AWS is hustling as if it's a retail giant. You know, this is what Amazon.com was very good at. Like, no questions asked, customer service is awesome, customer support is seamless. any brand, you look at Tumi, or you look at Nordstrom, you look at Costco, you look at Amazon, just look at it. Any brand out there that has amazing net promoter score, Apple, they all have had awesome customer support. And that's not a coincidence. It's the thing that actually results in a net dollar-based expansion of 130 and 35. And most companies are not good at it. I mean, at Nutanix, we did an amazing job of this. Our NPS was 90 for like 7 years. Imagine Apple is at 72 or something, and we were at 90 for 7 years. And it cost us some money, but we felt like, and we got like, in those 10 years, we've gotten like 7 billion in revenue cumulatively. But there were 1,000 customers that gave us half of that. And that just meant like we were so good with them. We were so good at opening up our developers, the product managers, our designers, and collaborating with our customers, because the software doesn't always work. But when they actually remember how you took care of them and how you also went to them and asked them about, what do you think of this design? And what about this user research? What about this button? Customers remember a lot of that. So look, I don't have this kind of an access with other companies that will basically just throw software over the wall or service over the wall. So it's really important this day and age to say that we have great customer success, because of which we have great retention.
Yeah, it brings up the point of, you did it at Nutanix for 1,000 customers. But how do you do that for?
Actually, we did it for 20,000.
20,000, but how as a startup today, how do you do it for everybody and built in as well? And technology platforms like CRM, Salesforce, all of these, they were built for sales guys only. Developers don't even have access.
Yeah,
They don't, when they sell CRM, they say, okay, how many sales guys will be using it? That's it. Question ends there. But I think with the PLG era and now with developers, AI actually pushing developers at the center of the car, how do we provide the tools to developers to succeed and get that direct channel, lightning channel to the customer?
You're right. And one more thing that will happen in terms of productization, I feel packaging wise, and maybe it's because I have a bias for this, I feel like you can't just be a bolt-on on someone else's business software. See, because someone else, that big incumbent out there, will AI wash their way into this anyway. So if you're building a company right now, you might as well build a difficult company, because it's as hard to just be a system of intelligence in someone else's record as it is to build a record and the intelligence piece equally so. Because then at least you own your destiny. You know what it means. Now,
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I want to compound what you're saying, and I think it's an exciting time, but I don't know if the word exciting would be relatable to everyone in the audience, and I hope Citibank would be working on this as well. Contact centers are huge investment now from large corporations. So they're putting they meaning the large corporations around the world, are putting significant 10x plus budgets into contact centers, because they realized and COVID was a compound of this, over the time that large corporations and governments had to figure out contact centers so they could really access the customer, right? And then when they access the customer just for general customer care, obviously they could figure out, we can upsell them and we can learn more about our product and get more revenue out of the situation. So compounding on what you were saying, or just additive, was contact centers are going to be a big hub, I think, for large corporations and governments in the next era of software.
And that goes to Dheeraj's point about customer support.
Yeah.
How do you drive it? You keep building humans, contact centers,
Yeah.
humans sitting in India, etc.
Yeah, look, it's 5x more expensive
Yeah.
to get a new customer than to actually retain an existing one and get 30% more out of them next year or something. I mean, you look at these pipelines and say, okay, what's the conversion rate from existing customers? You probably get 40 cents to the dollar of pipeline. You probably get 9 to 10 cents on a dollar of pipeline on new customers. So you see how 4x more expensive to actually get more dollars from existing versus new. And I think that just comes down to support. If you cannot do a great job of support, you'll probably always just go after new customer acquisition. And in many ways, this happened to kingdoms. If you go back 1,000 years, there were kingdoms that were good at acquiring new territory, but losing all that territory as well. We have to figure out
Eventually, yeah.
what does it mean to really acquire territory, but also go and
Retain.
retain that.
Yeah.
So to your point, I think you were mentioning about support. I mean, I think no doubt AWS did a great job of kind of exposing engineers and build out the business. And I think for us, when we're coming from later in the game at Google Cloud, we had to do that for sure, right? We had to build a lot more customer relationship, build a whole support system, but also engineering access to it. But you also have to change the game somewhat as well, right? When you're coming sometimes as a later part of the market. And for us, the big difference was openness, right? And the combination of how do you provide good customer access, but make sure that the customers feel that they have a little more options and make it easily accessible to them as well, right? So our business, for example, 4 years ago when I joined, we were 6 billion. We had 28 billion last year. And that was much faster growth than any of these companies had because we kind of combined the two things and making sure that the customers and the startup community feel they have more say in terms of how those products will be available to them. And they have a choice and flexibility. So if you can combine the few things like that when you're building your products, and how do you really change the story somewhat, that also usually helps.
And sometimes it takes a third party to actually make that multi-cloud happen. Like, when we're looking at prompt engineering right now, we're like, oh, there's an open source thing called LangChain. I don't know if you folks actually are. But you can abstract a little bit of what AWS has to offer, what Google has to offer, others have to offer. So I think open source will play a pretty critical role in actually making this such that you have optionality in the future to move from here to there.
So maybe Sanjit, I can pick back on that question and maybe just unifying a couple of these themes, right? So one is, the role of large language models and how it's disrupting customer support. Second is bringing engineering and customer support together to drive more net retention and so forth. But the PLG thing and tying it to startup operational efficiency, right? Because the sales rep you didn't have to hire is ultimately, directly accretive to your bottom line. So how does, maybe Dheeraj, if you can speak to that, right? So this persona of the developer who's sitting in the customer's shoes, building the product directly with the customer for the customer, and then, it's rolled out as PLG. What does that look like for the companies going forward? Like, how does every company, even large FIs like, large financial institutions, etc., how do they embed that more of that user centricity into product and have PLG basically do everything, right?
No, I think that's a great point, and if anything, it's one of our biggest struggles because it's easy for us to just pivot completely to a sales-led model where we just hired SEs and reps in 30 NFL cities and top 10, the first 10 early adopter countries. We could just do that. I mean, we did that at Nutanix all day long. And I know that someday we'll actually have to do that too because it's human assist and machine assist, PLG being machine assist, you got to have both sides of this thing as well. But within PLG, I think one of the things that, we are at least learning is that, first of all, you need to be extremely design centric. So, and what I mean by that is, we have tried out everything. We've tried out user pilot and full story and walk me and all sorts of things that are just around onboarding. And it looks to me that one of the killer apps for GPT will be onboarding as well, where I feel like a click from a user who's stuck is really an implicit question to the bot saying, what do I do next? And without sounding like Clippy, like from those of you who remember Clippy from 20 years ago.
From the browser company that's making you download stuff, yeah.
I think it
One
has
of
to be very non-intrusively coming back and saying, these are the 3 things you could have done because others do this. So I think GPT has a role to play in onboarding in a big way. We are still scratching the surface of it. But the big piece that we have gotten it right, and hopefully this will help us in the future of PLG, is data. So every click goes into Google BQ in real time. We're able to take out the data. Every developer has access to BQ. We're making it even better now as we try to take that data and put it into S3 and bring it back to the browser. But analytics plays a big role here, and daily changes, daily sort of upgrades to the software, and putting your best engineers on digital campaigns. I think that's one of the things we've also been like, look, digital marketing is not a pure marketing play. it's an engineering job. It's you have to, just like what Amazon did back, if you go back to the 2000s, they said billing is not IT's job. Billing is an engineering job. So they put the best developers in billing, best developers in metering, best developers on things that up until then were IT's job. Like, no, these are engineering jobs. I think they did that with growth engineering and marketing just as much. They're like, no, these are engineering jobs. They're not pure play, Coke-like marketing jobs or something, you know. And I think the time is now for all startups to think about, okay, digital marketing is hardcore engineering. And we do this every day. I mean, Bhavna's team actually does marketing, but marketing and product cannot have any daylight between them. It has to be like they're so tight. Where the website ends, where the product begins, nobody could differentiate. Like, it's so seamless, you know. And iterations on when do you ask for the phone number, when do you ask for the official email, do you go with Gmail, what do you know about them if they only go with Gmail? There's so much curiosity that needs to come in at this point. And how do you reduce the friction and yet be very mindful of when are you okay to lose one of those who's not even willing to provide an official email or their phone number for OTP or something, you know. I think those are the kind of things that we grapple with, but in many ways the organizational structure of the company is very data centric. We've made it an engineering problem, and on a day-to-day basis, and designers and product managers are really doing well in transform.
I think also that the whole audience needs to think about too is now we're not just in the digital services here in Silicon Valley. We're in hardware, software, and software services. You know, Apple was the first to put those together much better than Nokia was, right? You know, as far as, you know, doing that. And now we have, let's just take a handful of Silicon Valley companies: Roku, Facebook, Google, and
Tesla, would you count them as Silicon Valley? Probably not, right?
well, what I'm trying to highlight is, you know,
It's a vertical
now
integration.
we've got
Yeah.
all the dimensions now. Google hasn't been, you know, trained on customer care, except for now they have the Pixel handset and they're doing Google Fi MVNO, mobile virtual network operator, you know. So now they have to start figuring out customer care versus just beautiful provisioning, right? I mean, so now they have to, should Google start to consider having a tangible store, right? Because Samsung has one, right? And Microsoft took theirs away over the COVID. So it's time to start thinking, when we think about DevRev, or we think about customer care, or we're thinking about the customer in general, and AI associated with hardware, software, and software services. It's triangulation of data that you get on the back end, and you can bring that to the front end of whether that consumer's a government user and a business user as the customer, or just a general consumer as the customer. So it's just getting three-dimensional complex, and that's where maybe where AI can come in and, you know, be the bread on the toast, or the butter on the toast, excuse me.
I will say one more thing on PLG is that it's not just a digital solution to the problem. The speed at which your MDRs, and we call them marketing development reps, pick up the phone when the eyeball is on the app, they just signed up, they're like, okay, now they're hovering, and now they could be actually stuck, you know. So it's not just the bot, but where do people go add value? Because once they're off the app, sending them an email is too late, you know, and you know, you can't text them. So there's a whole access issue, which is about agility, and then you have to think about the script for the MDR. So there's a lot of, you know, human versus bot sort of yin yang that needs to be together. But it's all about agility. It's all about doing it within the minute. It's all about what do we do on a daily basis, and it's like tracking the click stream beyond just what growth people in the last 10 years have done with beautiful journey maps. Like, okay, I see this. You know, there's a lot of people in retail who did some of these things. But I think you have to go to every click and understand what.
That timing, the depth of understanding and that timing.
Yeah, and it has to be cheap enough that every developer has access to it. I think you can't just say, look, only 5 of the growth managers have access to this journey map, and how do I quickly add more things to it is a culture.
So I'm going to ask maybe one last question, but I'll request the audience to start prepping. We'll have time for, I don't know, maybe 2 questions or so, but please prep your questions. So I think we touched upon API. I feel we haven't stressed upon it, but since we are in an era where there's so much collaboration happening at a product level, at a developer level, I feel the API growth is going to happen as AI grows as well. Now we are at an inflection point in AI, like we discussed. But I feel we are also at an inflection point in the API economy. They're going to go in parallel. How is DevRev looking at it, or maybe in general also? What are your thoughts, Dheeraj, and then we'll go to others.
Well, and just like design, API is good business, and I'll tell you what I mean by that. So if you're going to sell into mid-market or the enterprise, salespeople cannot be stuck saying, I don't have the feature. They have to be able to say, I have the feature. If you pay me 100K, I'll get it implemented. And not by my engineers, but by channel or by community people or whatever, or forward deployed professional services engineers. That's good business. Because if you try to left shift every feature to the underbelly of your software development, you'll never be able to really deal with the enterprise. But the enterprise has needs of all kinds, and if you look at what Salesforce did to Siebel, it was APIs. I mean, people talk about cloud and all this stuff, but at the core of it was that we have all this accessible. And in a world where SAP was like this on their ERP schema and data model and all this stuff, like no, you're not allowed to know about what these schemas are.
Yeah, unless you knew ABAP.
Yeah,
Just like, what the hell is that?
And here comes this company.
Yeah.
APIs are strategic. It has to be, the executive team has to be deciding the API strategy. And I know that sounds a little bit technical, but you look at companies like Evernote and Twitter, API, that was their strategy, and it kills them. Like I think Evernote had way too many APIs going on that it was like, okay, we can't even manage all of them. It was like leaky plumbing. And then Twitter, that was their product development, and they were able to squeeze it out and manage it a little bit. But there really wasn't much creativity of new product development coming out of either of those companies. So when we think about APIs, we don't want to have too many, and you don't want to have too little. So for me, and I think it's the executive team has to decide strategically, who do we want to API with? It's kind of like, how many kids do you want to have in your family, right? You got to decide in a rational aspect.
Yeah, manageable. Yeah. Amit, what do you think about it at Google Cloud?
No, same thing. I think giving access and making it much more transparent, right? And providing some kind of SLAs around that is an important thing for any kind of service you build. Today, people are not going to build directly and make it completely black box is very difficult. So every developers want proper clean access and dependability on that as well, and guaranteeing that this will be delivered to you on time with kind of SLA, but also how long you'll support it as well. And then be able to transition and upgrade or move fast as well, right? So I think we always kind of start with any of the product design.
And by the way, the hardest part there, Sanjit, and I'm sure all the startups out there who are like, how do you drink your own champagne? Like, at the end of the day, like DevRev, if we were to succeed, it'll be because we really enjoy our champagne, or not. And I don't just mean the API, but the apps, the webhooks, the daily active usage, the recall on an everyday basis, the reminders, all that stuff. We have to drink our own champagne, and it's equally true for APIs. I mean, and we struggle with this every day. I mean, it's so much easier to just bypass the gateway and be this east-west friend who uses gRPCs and like, oh yeah, I didn't have to go through the public gateway and the APIs that are public. But if you just went the last mile and acted like you are from the outside world, even though you're an insider who's on a payroll of this company, I think it'll take you much further distance. So we have had to painfully rewrite a couple of things that we were just using east-west gRPCs for. Instead, north-south APIs were the only way to have done this right. And create them as a snap-in in the marketplace. Let it be out there and let others create competitive plugins and snap-ins and things like that. So I think it's in the culture of a company is to really behave more and more like community developers rather than, oh, community has a DevRel person who will deal with community. Act like a community person yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing, just to add to all that, we talked a lot about product APIs and how we should have product APIs, but I think you can almost think of company as a set of APIs now, right? With the remote first workforce, where your workforce is distributed, your payroll is a global API, your corporate finance is a global API, your sales and marketing is a global API, where you are calling upon these virtual services on demand, and frankly, then the question almost becomes, with how far fewer people now you can run. Because if you can truly go to PLG and you have your chatbots that are helping your customers, and that input is now feeding directly into your developers, and maybe some of the SQL is now getting generated by ChatGPT. Your HR is now, through a company like Deal, and it's remote first. So, I mean, frankly, over time, it's how far fewer people we will need. And that was the whole purpose of API. You didn't need to develop the geolocation API, the geofencing API, the mobile API, etc., because you were consuming them as service. I almost think of the business APIs themselves will be as equally powerful as the product APIs.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I like that. I like that as well. Yeah.
I mean, and honestly, this is the culture that ServiceNow, in many ways, try to bring the customer-centric culture with ticketing. I know it's a mundane word, but they say every department has tickets. Like legal guys are like, what? And HR people are like, what? I've never done ticketing. But I think it brought this sort of producer-consumer culture within a company itself, which I think now, and they did a very good job, even though I look at it as a company that didn't get a lot of design right, but they got a lot of other design around templates really well figured out, So I think in this new day and age, what do templates look like with ChatGPT and others would be very powerful.
Awesome. We'll maybe open it up to Q&A.
So just for Dheeraj and Amit, right in the beginning, you guys alluded to the knowledge workers being potentially intimidated by AI models and everything. So we work in the financial services space. We use numerical models for predictive analysis, and it's blindingly obvious to us is that that LLM is a solution to a feature engineering problem. We get a lot more richer features, and we get better insights on this stuff. That's cool, and not just us. Everybody is looking at it that way. The point of let's say the problem we are trying to solve is the age-old problem of validation and explainability, which is which we keep bumping up against in the financial services industry. I'm sort of a little bit disappointed that the technologists have not, Silicon Valley, talking about as a whole, has not invested enough in that aspect of making it translatable, easy to understand by the common folk. You alluded to that a little bit as well. What do you think about that?
That's a very good point, very important point. But I also go back because to me, the more things change, the more they remain the same. If you look at hardware, it took a while before VHDL, Verilog, like true verification started to really come about. Hardware existed before that too. And I think we are in that age where, as and when it starts to become so core, that the ecosystem starts to think about verification as a formal problem, and it became a formal sort of definition of how do you really verify hardware that this thing will actually work and within the parameters and so on. So I think we are in the early stages of this. We have started with things like scoring, so there'll be some benchmarks around, in our space we think about deflection as a benchmark, like just because you have a bot means nothing if it's not doing 95% recall from existing knowledge, and as opposed to 5%. Auditability is another one of those where I feel like this is where back office usability will be a little harder, but front office a lot easier, because you don't go to jail for doing some of these front office things probably 95% right as opposed to 100% right. For the CFO's office, probably harder. There will be, and you mentioned this too, that not everything has to be large language model. In fact, we have seen that in some of our stuff, sometimes just using regression with semantic search goes really far. So I think going back to horses for courses, we'll have to really think about, if people I look at large language model as a data structure. I tend to look at it just a very large data structure. And you give it some input, it also gives it some output on the other side. You have to use it wisely as well, so that you have easier explainability if you use a simpler model with maybe a search on top of it. So I think it's early days. The kind of things you're talking about will come from the ecosystem, and in the next 3 to 5 years, this is the way AI washing will be reduced as well. Like, we have to build benchmarks for deflection so that Intracom can't go and just AI wash their way into this. Just because they say ChatGPT 4 doesn't mean that it's really deflecting much. And to do this for a private enterprise with private data cheaply is the hard part. That's why I feel like doing engineering of AI now is probably the place where the rubber will meet the road. You cannot have AI scientists make money on this stuff. You have to have engineers who are just doing AI all day long.
Yeah, makes sense. Amit, do you want to add?
No, I think you said it quite well. I think the main thing I would just add is be outcome driven. And then I think a lot of things that you're building make sense. Not just use AI for the sake of AI or LLMs or whatever it is, right? If you have clarity in terms of what you want to get out of it, and then find the right capabilities around that, I think it's probably better than trying to fix everything from this way.
Wonderful. Piyush?
Sure. A great conversation, great discussions, and I think it's the era of AI and the ecosystems, and one-off things will not be the case, and we really need to generate that kind of confidence in the market. So obviously today everybody has LLMs, and everybody says we are an AI first company, but it has to somehow come to doing things efficiently with less friction. So you talked about the ServiceNow thing and how back office, front office. Not many of us like to generate tickets. How can we reduce the friction in such a manner that we can find the right AI for the right job through the right API it's served to us? So I think there's a market for that somewhere. Want to see who are the top 3 or 4 players in the market who are going to emerge, will be offering that.
I think it's very early. There were 8 search engines, and then came the 9. Right, so I think it's very early. Think about it. Before 2003 or 2002, there were 9 other search engines, and nobody gave Google a chance. But the way they engineered the search engine is what made it awesome. And their love for data, their love for commodity everything, their love for a culture of distributed systems, economized data centers. Because Yahoo was lazy, honestly. They had. I worked at Oracle, he worked at Oracle, but they had Solaris, massive Solaris machines. They had NetApp, massive NetApp. It was the largest NetApp shop in the world.
Oh, wow.
They're doing 300 million a year of NetApp, They're one of the largest Oracle shops. I remember 2003, Overture, which was their ad business, they had 140 racks, And when I say racks, I mean Oracle rack, Oracle rack, RACs, real application clusters. They were really going high end, and here comes a company that says, no, we're going to do stuff which is engineered with Taiwan class hardware, and Linux was shitty. Linux was shitty. 2.2 was actually a pretty crappy piece of software, but they said we're going to make it awesome, and MySQL, it was crappy compared to Oracle. They made it awesome. So I think really looking at this as an engineering problem are the companies that will do really well there.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so Dheeraj, whenever I look at you, for some reason I remember 2 words, because that came from our first conversation ever, and that's about connecting dots. So period. And when I heard this conversation and I see Amit and you sitting on the same couch, the 2 words ring my mind, and it makes me realize that Google Cloud now has this acquired this 100-pound gorilla called Epigee, which is on its way to become a 200-pound gorilla. And there are actually many more API-driven companies that came out of the same Epigee team, one being StepZen that recently got acquired by IBM. So obviously, the larger giants are realizing the power of API economy, and the API economy itself is growing. And I know from our experience that the Epigee team, now it's of course part of Google Cloud, has been very customer centric. But I think that DevRev can make them customer obsessed, as this 100-pound gorilla is on its way to become a 200-pound gorilla. So that's where my connecting dots, 2 cents to my connecting dots.
A tiny drop in the ocean of this, but I feel like a lot of general managers and CEOs underestimate what their developers, designers, and product managers can bring to the customers. And it's time to unleash some of the power to bring the differentiation that they have.
And I think this is a scale and a partnership that is probably made in heaven if it if it delivers the customer obsession that
it's. Thank you for being a salesperson.
Thank you.
Keep on talking.
Looking forward to be paid for it.
There you go.
One last question.
Yeah, the comments both Amit and Dheeraj you made, it's kind of like trying to again connect the dots to see like not just being a technology first company, but more customer centric and outcomes focused, right? So in all industries, that's where we kind of like, okay, what problems are we trying to solve? What value are you trying to bring? So that actually you can get paid for that, right? Then technology is like, okay, you use that brand or this brand to kind of like implement it. So when we kind of like talk about AI, of course, there are different companies competing for this thing. Whichever is gonna win, or maybe it's a combination, maybe it's multiple players. How do you kind of like make sure, one, you're generating value? How do you kind of also illustrate, hey, here is the value you're getting, so that you pay either more or you buy this versus something else, right? What are your thoughts about like the customer acquisition piece, as well as touching on some of the points which Shailesh kind of mentioned, explainability and even provenance. Where is the data coming from, right? When you kind of like point to, hey, here are the 3 research papers that data is coming from, it kind of like gives more of a guarantee or kind of peace of mind also, right? Without that, is it hallucinating, according to Sam Altman, right?
No, you're right.
I wonder like how you guys think about bringing in the customers, proving the credibility of what they're saying or providing.
No, that's a
and
great
then kind
point.
of like
And look, I think, again, look back at Napster, for those of you who were there in the Napster days. I don't know, did you ever use Napster?
Yeah, I used it. And Kazam.
Yeah, and it was a craze back in the day. This was P2P at its zenith. But then it needed an Apple to come and say, we know how to productize this. By forging deals with record labels and really thinking hard about DRM as a way to really make this into a multi-billion-dollar industry. I think AI is going through that right now, where it's like the Napster of like, it just doesn't matter where it is. It's like, yeah, it's in your machine. I can stream that song here. Who cares about copyright and all this stuff? At Adobe, we talk about this, I sit on the board at Adobe, and we talk about authenticity and provenance as a big issue.
Mm-hmm.
And especially with imaging, it's a really big issue, because machines are still inspired a lot by human creativity, and one good thing I like about Adobe is that we have a very large bank of human-generated image database, So now, at least we know that it's come from that pool, and enterprises will be comfortable if Adobe were to really go and say, look, this is the way we give back to that community. So we're still figuring it out, like, what does it mean to give back? Because individual provenance might be hard, like, because there's other things, like with 2-3 images, and like, how do you really keep that lineage of where this image really took this portion from versus some other portion is hard. But back to the pool of every Adobe stock contributor, and how do you really go and up-level the whole community might be easier. So we'll see. I think it's early days, but provenance, of course, is a big one. Enterprises will not touch things like the way a lot of people didn't touch Napster. Like, look, I'm not going to touch Napster for that reason alone. I mean, I think crypto actually suffered from a lot of that too. They just didn't have explainability and auditability and all that built in. So a lot of wealth managers are like, I'm not touching it, until we really understand some of these things as well. So I know that it's the new froth, like crypto was 2-3 years ago. We have to be careful that the ones that will survive and thrive will actually take care of some of those things as well.
Well, this is maybe a lob to Citibank. Is Citibank investing in these types of AI companies or customer service, and then utilizing it internally?
Yeah. And to I think Shailesh's question, and then Nagesh to your question as well. So explainability is a core to any product we deploy, right? So in fact, regulators will not let us deploy, a product that does not have explainability.
Because it's bias built in.
Yeah, because there is bias. There could be, and that is something that in financial services industry, right? There've been known cases of redlining. There've been known cases of, other banks have been fined for not lending to certain ethnicities, demographics, ethnicities, etc. And that was driven sometimes by models and the output from the models. So a number of industry partnerships, academia partnerships that happened. There's well-known models, the SHAP models, the line models that have been deployed. There's a number of startups that are that have trust and explainability as core to their value proposition, where you can run a model through their software and it will tell you which of your variables are contributing to bias, or your data itself may have certain bias, and therefore you need to have more balanced data. So there's a lot of that the industry is doing.
Yeah, so just to comment on that, explainability, the way the industry is defined, it needs explanation by itself. People are having a very hard time. I'm speaking from the business side. The Shapley model, all those things are great. It's very hard to explain that to a regulator. What explainability is. We haven't been able to do it.
You're right, and the auditors might not even be ready to sign the dotted line for something that is not explainable,
Yeah.
There's one last piece that there's a virtue of AI which will be tested as well, is upgradability. There was a really good article like 4 or 5 years ago about why robotic automation failed. And this is like, wow, really, robotic automation failed? In reality, it has never really kept to its promise, because it was faster and easier to retrain humans when assembly lines changed than to actually go retrain robots. Okay.
Yes.
Very brittle. Yeah,
right?
very
I mean,
brittle.
I'm like,
Yeah.
and those are the kind of things that we'll face in these new models. These models are the new bots. And the question is, when you upgrade it, what does it break? And it ties back to lineage of like, so why was a decision like this yesterday and today it's something?
Because the Gen 1 was very deterministic, right? These Gen 1 robotic processes were extremely deterministic. So like literally one pixel change in the screen meant that the robot had to be retrained. So I think the newer models that are more probabilistic, right? They're more algorithmically trained, I think should overcome some of those previous generation issues.
Wonderful. All right. With that, on that note, we'll end the discussion. Sorry for going over. Let's thank Vibhor, Dheeraj, Amit, and Joe for taking time out of their busy schedules.
Thank you, Sanjit and Ekta and everybody
Thank
else,
you.
Emily and
Next we have happy hour.